Hello, I'm Robin Tudor and I'm the founder of Empower Total Health. For many, many years now, I've been writing a weekly e-newsletter and I've finally decided I'm going to join the 21st century and start doing video. I'll still be writing my weekly e-newsletter, so for those of you who like that medium and like to read, don't worry, I'm going to keep doing that. But I also wanted to reach out to you in new ways, including video. Now, the topic that I'd like to discuss this week is something that's come up a lot for me in conversations with my clients over the last month or so. My job involves helping people to recover their health, and most of my clients come to me already having a fair idea that they need to adopt better eating habits and generally take more responsibility for their health. And that's great. Wouldn't it be great if everyone did that? But what has arisen for a lot of people, and I'm increasingly alert to it and sensitive to it, is when people cross the line between that healthy, wonderful level of rational concern and interest in their well-being and investment in healthy eating into into what I would say is a psychologically unhealthy state, anxiety and over concern, dare I say obsession with how they're eating and what they're eating, and just this drive, this obsessive drive to get it right, to get it perfect all the time. Now, those of you who've come to see me as a private client or attended a workshop that I give or in my Empowered membership program, or read articles that I've written, you might be aware that I, as a general rule, do not like diagnostic labels, especially those that the psychiatric profession increasingly wants to pin on people whose behaviour deviates in any way from what they define as normal, whatever that means. And some examples of this would be labels like social anxiety disorder. This was actually coined by the pharmaceutical industry, as the investigative journalist Ray Moynihan has described. So social anxiety disorder is an invented condition dreamed up by a drug company in order to sell more of their product. And social anxiety disorder is what, back in the day used to just be described as shyness. So now it's not on the spectrum of normal human behavior, it's a pathology and it needs to be treated. This drives me crazy. One of my other total favorites here is a condition called disruptive behavior disorder not otherwise specified. Isn't that a great label? Back when I was at school, I think this is what our teachers might have defined as bored, disengaged kid from a troubled home acting out, or possibly in the privacy of the staff room, they might even have called it annoying out of control brat. But there's one diagnostic label that, as a practitioner who basically spends a lot of her time talking to people about how and why they ought to be improving their eating habits, there's one label that has become of increasing interest and at times concern for me. And that label is orthorexia, which is sort of loosely defined as right eating. That's not an exact literal translation, but it'll do for our purposes. It's a relatively newly defined condition, if you want to call it that. And it's so new, in fact, it hasn't yet gained universal acceptance in the psychiatric profession. The committee assessing conditions for inclusion in the latest revision of the Psychiatrist's Bible, the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, 5th edition. It was released in 2013. And they decided against including orthorexia in this diagnostic manual, which allows psychiatrists to pin those labels onto people on the basis of diagnostic criteria. Because being a relatively newly described state, the diagnostic criteria for it aren't at all clear. And the concern on the part of the committee members, and I share this, is that where do you draw the line? Okay, so people who are quite psychologically healthy, I like to think of myself as being psychologically healthy. Other people may disagree, who knows, but I think I'm pretty psychologically healthy, and I have a particular interest in my health on the basis of prior health history and also my family health history, and so I'm pretty invested in taking good care of myself. And that does not cause me any trauma or stress. It's just part of my everyday life. Now, if orthorexia were taken to extremes, people like me might be defined as having a disorder. And so that's why there's been kind of almost like a moratorium placed on this condition until it's defined a little more closely. So here are some examples of where the term orthorexia and the ideas behind it could end up sort of going horribly wrong. So the first example is one that I'm very, very familiar with, and that's in the eating disorders community. So in all eating disorder treatment facilities and programs that I'm aware of, participants who have eating disorders are basically not permitted to pursue a vegan diet while they're in treatment. Essentially, any desire to be vegan, even if your rationale for that is purely ethical and you have no concern about the health impacts of eating animal products. It's disallowed because veganism is defined as being a part of the person's eating disorder. Now, I will grant you, there are people who will use veganism as a smokescreen for an eating disorder. So they'll say that they're vegan when what's really going on is they've developed an anxiety condition around eating, and so they've defined animal products as not okay for them. In the case of an anorexic, this might be as part of a process of sort of gradually excluding more and more foods from the diet in order to bring about weight loss. But because I see a lot of people with eating disorders and I see a lot of people who are vegan, I have seen quite a number of clients, they tend to be young females, who have a highly sensitive personality, highly sensitive temperament, and in my professional opinion, that highly sensitive temperament actually serves to predispose people to developing eating disorders, but it also predisposes people to developing a very profound sense of empathy and concern for the well-being of animals, which fairly logically often extends to the place where the person does not want to eat them anymore and so decides to become an ethical vegan. And so it's perfectly possible for a person's ethical veganism to be separate and apart from their eating disorder. And it's not a requirement at all. It's not an actual requirement of recovery from an eating disorder that you must eat animal products. But what often happens in these facilities is that people are forced to eat animal products, even if that puts them in deep conflict with their personal ethics. And they have to do that in order to be pronounced recovered and basically discharged from the treatment facility. The other thing that goes on in these eating disorder treatment facilities is that recovery is also defined as being able to comfortably eat junk food, for want of a better word, without restraint. And this was described to me quite graphically by one of my clients, Sandy. And Sandy's been very open about her recovery journey. You can actually watch an interview that I did with her in the success stories part of my website. If you go to empowertotalhealth.com.au/success stories and then success-stories, I should say, and look for Sandy's story, you can actually watch that interview. So to summarize, pretty much, every day people in these eating disorder recovery units, particularly people suffering from anorexia nervosa, are told that they need to eat chips, ice cream, various other forms of junk food. And so what often happens is once they leave the facility and they're so-called recovered from anorexia, they then develop an overweight problem because they've got so accustomed and sometimes even hooked on eating all this junk food. There's also a potential legal ramification of orthorexia becoming an accepted diagnosis and being used clinically. And again, I have an example of this to share, which relates to a child. This is a current client of mine who, before she came to see me, this child developed a juvenile form of autoimmune arthritis, kind of like a kiddie version of rheumatoid arthritis. So this poor girl has had massively swollen and painful joints for many years. And before she came to see me, the mother of the child had got pretty sick of the pharmaceutical treatments, which really were not working for her daughter. Her daughter's condition was not improving. In fact, it was getting worse. And so off her own bat, the mother began exploring nutritional approaches to autoimmune disease. And she found through experimentation that if she excluded foods like dairy products and gluten and meat, especially red meat, from her daughter's diet, her condition dramatically improved. So far, so good, except the dietitians at the hospital where they were having treatment said that she was basically starving her child and even threatened her with calling in protective services to remove her, child protection services to remove her child from her if she did not start feeding her, quote unquote, normal food again. All right. So these are some of the big issues that I see with this term orthorexia and just potential problems with its adoption and acceptance of the concepts behind it. Having said all of that, I will grant you, there are certainly people, and I've known quite a few of them in my clinical practice, who take the desire to eat a healthy diet to what I and they and probably most people would consider an unhealthy degree, and they take that idea to extremes, and they end up in fairly significant psychological distress, a lot of anxiety, and they can even run into some fairly major health problems, especially if their version of orthorexia involves progressive food restrictions, so that they end up eating pretty much nothing at all. So often the trajectory is the person begins by wanting to pursue, say, clean eating, and then they decide that they're going to eat an all raw diet, and then they decide they're only going to eat fruit, and then they begin fasting as well in various ways that aren't particularly healthy. I'm a fan of fasting, but it can be done wrong, and so this person ends up in a lot of trouble because their desire to eat a healthy diet has just gone to an unhealthy extreme. Now, I've been in practice, in clinical practice, for over 20 years, actually more than 21 years now. And I've seen more than my fair share of people with eating disorders, more than I think the average practitioner sees. So I've got a very finely tuned sense that allows me to pretty easily distinguish between these categories of people, the psychologically healthy ones who just want to be healthy, and the ones who've crossed that line. And that's helped and to a fair degree by the fact that I actually battled an eating disorder myself from around my mid to late teens through to it was pretty much my mid-20s before I really completely conquered my eating disorder. So again, that gives me a fair degree of insight into the thoughts, the feelings, and the behavior patterns that characterize people who have developed or are sort of teetering on the brink of developing orthorexia, if you want to give it that label, or just, you might call it excessive anxiety about getting healthy eating right. So here are some characteristics that I've identified that help me to distinguish between the psychologically healthy place and psychologically unhealthy place. So if you have a healthy relationship with food, if you have a healthy, rational relationship with your own health, here's what you're likely to feel, think, and do. First of all, in your own head and in your speech, you'll classify foods as being either health promoting or health sabotaging, healthy or unhealthy, based on your understanding of nutrition science, which will hopefully be grounded in solid science rather than some of the claptrap that you read on the web. If you see other people eating an unhealthy diet, you might feel sad, you might feel disappointed or regretful, especially if they're people that you care about and you know that they're harming themselves through their eating habits. But you'll recognize and remember your own healthy eating journey, right? That you started at a particular place, probably eating fairly conventionally, and it's taken you, multiple steps to get to where you are now. And you'll acknowledge that other people would need to follow their own journey too. And so it's kind of like you're content to let them be on their journey just as you are on yours. It still might frustrate you when people that you love don't listen to you, but you're content to just let them live. You'll choose foods that are healthy most of the time, maybe even almost all of the time, but you'll feel comfortable with eating foods that are a bit off the plan in special circumstances. Say if you're out at a restaurant with friends, or you're on a plane flight and you either forgot to bring your own food or you already ate it, and it's a long flight and the only foods that are available are not quite up to your normal standards, but you're pretty hungry and so you'll eat them anyway, and you'll be able to tolerate that. Okay, so you'll feel pleased with yourself when you choose healthy foods, but on the occasions when you eat something a bit less than healthy, you just kind of like chalk it up to experience. If it's something you don't want to repeat again, you'll extract the lesson from it and talk yourself through how to avoid that challenging situation in future. But if you slip up now and again, you cut yourself some slack. You're human and that's life. If you're psychologically healthy in your relationship with food, you'll find that you're eating and, most importantly, enjoying a wider range of foods than you did before when you used to eat, what most people would consider normal. So, you might say to yourself or to others, back when I used to eat what everyone else ate, I never even knew what a black beluga lentil is. And wow, I love them. They're great. So the range of foods that you're eating is wider and your enjoyment of food is even more than before. When you plan your meals, you do so for the sake of ease and convenience, and also if something comes up that kind of throws a spanner in the works of your plans, you can adapt pretty easily and comfortably to that. You think about food only when you're hungry, when you're actually eating the food, or in those times when you're searching for new recipes or planning meals. And while that may take a little more time in the early stages of dietary change, most people that I know who are well entrenched with healthy eating can sort of, bang out a simple week's meal plan in 10 minutes or less. So thinking about and planning about food is not taking up very much time at all. When it comes to tracking your food intake, you either won't do it at all, you've just got healthy food in the house and you eat when you're hungry and you stop when you're full and that's all there is to it, or you'll only track your food intake for, from time to time out of curiosity about whether you're, conforming to the particular guidelines that you wish to follow, or perhaps if you're preparing for a specific event like an athletic competition, you might track your food, at those times, but most of the time you don't. When you read food labels, you do so that you can compare products and choose the healthiest option. And sometimes that will result in you choosing something that's less than absolutely optimal, but it's kind of like it's the best thing going at the time, and so you'll grab it. And fundamentally, you'll adhere to a healthy diet in order to maximize your capacity to enjoy your time with your loved ones, your friends and family, to engage in enjoyable activities, and to contribute to your community and achieve your career or financial goals. So in other words, you'll look at healthy eating as the way to enjoy life more. Now, what about if you've crossed that line and you're in an unhealthy relationship with food and an unproductive way of viewing your own health? In this case, you're going to classify foods as either good or bad. So you have a list in your head, good food list, bad food list, and you'll feel good or bad depending on what you've been eating. This is something that I'm hypersensitive to with clients, and many of them initially think I'm just kind of like semantically nitpicking, because when they say to me, I feel really good with my food, I'll pause them. I'll say, whoa there, what do you mean you've been really good with your food? Like, do you mean you feel like if you eat kale and lentils, you're going to grow a halo, but you'll sprout devil's horns if you eat chips and chocolate? I mean, that's not what it's about, right? You're not good when you eat healthy food. You've just made a healthy choice. That's all, okay? And you're not bad when you eat less than healthy foods or you eat a little bit too much and whatever. That's not bad. It's not necessarily a constructive choice, but it's not bad as in morally repugnant. Now, the other thing that you're going to notice is that if you see people who are eating unhealthy foods, you feel a sense of judgment or even disgust about what they're eating, as in, wow, that person's really fat. Maybe she shouldn't be eating the ice cream, but sort of in this really kind of judgmental way. And the problem with judging others, of course, is that if you feel even the tiniest bit of temptation to eat that food, or if you actually succumb to that temptation, go ahead and eat it, you're going to end up judging yourself as well and just feeling really guilty and ashamed of yourself. When you're in situations where the only food choices are those that are unhealthy, you're going to end up feeling very uncomfortable, quite anxious, maybe a sense of inner conflict as well, because you can't get the foods that you define as healthy. In terms of what drives you making your food choices, you feel compelled to make healthy food choices by the fear of something bad happening if you don't. Either that you're going to get sick, or that you're going to, be a bad person or be of lesser worth. In extreme cases, this even leads to people feeling a sense of impurity or contamination or defilement if they if they eat foods that they define as unhealthy. Another characteristic is that the list of foods that are on your healthy list is getting smaller and smaller. So more and more foods are being classed as like off the plan, they're not healthy, can't eat them, bad if I eat them, okay? And also that the whole sense of enjoyment in eating has basically evaporated, that it's no longer an enjoyable activity to prepare food or eat it, all right? Which is pretty sad when you think about it. The planning part of meals it has an entirely different characteristic to psychologically healthy people. So people who are sort of, verging into orthorexia or already in full-blown orthorexia, they plan their meals so that they can have absolute 100% control over everything they eat. And of course, if those plans for what you want to eat are disrupted, you feel anxious, you feel like you can't cope, like your whole world is destabilized if you can't eat what you plan to eat. And you think about food practically all the time. It's like there's barely a moment in the day when you're not thinking about food. You might think about food when you're at work, while you're talking to your friend, even, God forbid, in the middle of sex, as in, oh God, I'm naked. Is that extra potato that I ate showing, right? So really obsessive, intrusive level of thoughts about food. Tracking the food can become obsessive, like a daily practice where every morsel of food that goes into your mouth has to be written down, and then you go over that food log and you analyze it obsessively. Have I eaten too much? Have I eaten too much of the wrong things? Am I eating too many carbs, not enough protein, too much fat, whatever, right? So when it comes to food labels, the point of reading food labels when you're in this, psychologically unhealthy place is so that you can be absolutely certain that you are 100% avoiding any substance, like even a trace amount of any food or food additive that is on your unhealthy list. And so you might walk out buying nothing because none of the labels meet your satisfaction. And the upshot of this is that you find that your obsession with healthy eating and health itself is actually interfering. It's detracting from your relationships, from your work performance. It's preventing you from engaging with your community and detracting from your enjoyment of leisure time as well. So the bottom line, this is what I tell my clients who are struggling with this issue, is what I call your come from. It's a fairly non-jargonish term. It means the psychological stance that you're coming from when you think about your dietary choices and also other behaviours that influence your health. So psychologically healthy people come from the stance that their health is the means to an end, not an end in itself. So that end, that purpose to which focusing on your health serves, is the maximum enjoyment of life for the longest possible time. So people in this healthy state actually see investing in their health as an investment in their current enjoyment of life and also their future enjoyment of life. So in other words, their desire to live a full, active, engaged life is what motivates their decision to make healthy eating choices. Now, psychologically unhealthy people, their come from is the stance that health is an end in itself. It's something that defines their personal worth or their moral virtue or value. And so therefore, if they're showing any signs of ill health, whether that be carrying an extra kilo or popping a premenstrual zit or something like that, any signs of those are like visible to the world as indicators that they are of lower value, okay, that they're not as worthy because they're not completely healthy. Also, people suffering from orthorexia often have this fear that their health is a very fragile thing, and that any little minor indiscretion, any little minor deviation from their healthy eating plan is liable to have very serious consequences. And there's a small minority of people for whom that is actually true. But for the vast majority of healthy people, they can kind of, have something that's a little off the plan now and again. That one serve of chips that you have once a month, even if it's, hydrogenated oil, it isn't going to give you cancer. Okay, it's just your body isn't that fragile. So, what do you do then? If you've listened to this list and you've identified thoughts, feelings, and behaviours that make you worry that you may be developing orthorexia or that you already have it, what do you do next? The first step is to start paying really close attention to your thoughts. And this can be harder than it sounds because a lot of these thoughts are what the psychologist, actually, I think it was a psychiatrist, Aaron Beck, who is the founder of cognitive therapy, he describes them as automatic thoughts. They're going on all the time, you're not even necessarily aware of them. But you may well notice feelings of discomfort or obsessive or compulsive type behaviors. And if you then start paying attention to your thinking process, you will be able to notice the obsessive thoughts, the intrusive thoughts about food and eating. So when you started to tune into them, write them down. Write down these thoughts and the feelings and emotions and behaviors they're associated with. And that's what you can then start to work on. So here's an example. Just say you packed up a healthy lunch and you put it in the fridge at work. And then at lunchtime, you go to get your lunch out, and one of your junk food munching colleagues has put a bag of greasy takeaway right next to, or even on top of, your healthy lunch. And as you stand there with the fridge door open, you might notice you feel really uncomfortable, a bit grossed out, like you can see the grease leaching through the paper. And you might have thoughts like, I don't even want to touch that. If I touch that, will the grease kind of like get into my body? Did that grease seep into my lunch? Even though it's got a lid on it, did it, like, is my lunch contaminated? You might notice a compulsion to actually throw your lunch away because you can't bear the thought of having any kind of contact with this, greasy whatever it is that your colleague was eating. So what would typically happen if you were having a cognitive behavior type therapy for this issue is the therapist would get you to focus on the thoughts and challenging the thoughts using cognitive techniques. I think there's a lot of value in that, but I find that people who are experiencing this are frequently extremely emotionally activated, very, very anxious, and it's difficult to have them challenge their thoughts in that situation. I like to use emotional freedom techniques, or EFT, and teach them to clients to use for themselves so they can calm down those emotions, which then really facilitates getting to the heart of those thoughts and beliefs that are dysfunctional and turning them around into helpful, health-serving thoughts and beliefs. I also find that EFT is very, very useful for addressing what I personally think is the root cause of these irrational preoccupations with food and this unhealthy, anxious drive to get it absolutely perfect. I think the roots of that lie in early childhood experiences, frequently in adolescence as well, that cause a person to kind of systematically devalue themselves, to undervalue their own worth, and then to latch onto behaviours that, if they engage in them, they think will give them a sense of value. In other words, I can only be loved, I can only be acceptable if I am perfect. So if I eat perfectly, if I exhibit perfect health, then I will feel okay about myself. But if I eat even like one bite of chocolate, I feel less valuable. I feel less worthy. People might see the evidence of my chocolate indiscretion in my weight or my complexion or whatever. Okay. So I use EFT to address those early life incidents that cause people to develop beliefs about themselves that are wrong, unhealthy, and unhelpful. So the other major thing that I discuss with clients who are on this recovery journey goes back to what I mentioned before, the come from. In order to be able to see your health as the means to an end, you have to figure out what that end is for you. Okay, so what's that? What gives you satisfaction, fulfillment? What is the bigger purpose for your life here on earth? In what ways can you make a meaningful contribution up to your friends and family, to your community, to the environment, to the planet, to the sum of human knowledge? Why are you here? Like what unique set of talents and abilities and interests do you have that you were put on this planet to develop and to share with others for the betterment of all? All right, it's a big set of questions, but focusing out on those bigger issues is really important for stopping that obsessive inward focus on me and what I'm doing right and wrong that really characterizes orthorexia and probably a lot of anxiety disorders when you think about it. So I hope this has been interesting and useful to you, and I do hope it's been thought-provoking as well. I would love to read your comments about it. I really want this to be a conversation, so if you agree with me, disagree with me, put your thoughts below. If you found this useful, please do like it, share it, send it on to people who you think would benefit from watching this and hearing this. If you want me to continue doing these videos, again, put a comment below. I'm looking forward to engaging with you more in the future. Thanks for your time today.